Hey folks, Josh of Josh Fields Photography coming at you with a kind of tutorial on how to set up a landscape solar eclipse composite, similar to this. And I, be honest with you, I have kind of settled upon this process this time. This is the first time I've ever done it. I searched and watched a lot of YouTube tutorials on how to do this, and they all missed one thing, and many of the others, they all gave me like a good idea, but then another one gave me a different good idea, and this is kind of a melding of a few different things I learned, and then also one thing that I have not been able to find any instructions on, and this is just the way that I kind of got around, this problem. This is probably not the only way. There are probably other ways, but let's dig into it. So this is the image we're going to kind of be recreating. And who knows, when going through this tutorial, I may not do things exactly the same way. But basically, we're going to kind of start from scratch. But this is what we're looking for. This is a landscape image taken at around 21 millimeters with during totality, during kind of full glory, mid totality, corona. I wanted the sun to be, or sorry, the sunset, fake sunset, really 360-degree sunset, but I wanted that to be fairly minimal but noticeable, kind of on the horizon. So anyway, let's dig into it. So I've got two other documents open here. This is really just a example to show you what we're looking for. The first document is going to be I've loaded in all the photos of the partial phases and all the photos from totality. So I've got the diamond ring, I've got Bailey's beads, prominences, the diamond ring going out. Everything is labeled, everything is grouped. And we're going to do that again kind of as we go. So, I'll also mention I'm going to be very carefully skipping certain elements. So for example, my 85% partial phase was blurry. Had to refocus, so just going to cut that out. We're going to make sure to cut it out equally on both sides. And again, as you can see by this final image, this is not every single phase. If I were to do that, then this would be extremely small in the picture and, maybe impressive, but I think it lacks a lot of the visual appeal of having, it kind of be fairly prominent in the image. So let's go kind of step by step. Here I have just the base image, and then I have turned on a just basic kind of brightness contrast, just to give it a little bit of pop. So that's all I've done so far. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come in and we're just going to set up kind of some lines to guide. And we want these to guide both the size and kind of the angle that these phases go through. And I looked this up and based this on, kind of PhotoPills and a couple other apps that show the progression of the sun through the sky on that day at that location. But also, it doesn't have to be exact, right? This is not a scientific reproduction photo. So I'm just going to kind of approximate maybe this angle, and I'm going to go back because I like what I ended up with last time. So I'm going to change that a little bit, make it a little bit steeper, right about there. And the cool thing is these are super easy to do again later and change later. I'm just going to Command or Control J to make a copy, V to choose move, and I'm going to just right now approximate the size. That's it. That's all I'm doing right now. Those are just to guide me. So I'm going to come back to these composite parts. I've seemed to always mispronounce that word. So we have our... Oh, I don't have the Corona photo loaded. So let's actually come in here and get it from this one. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to duplicate, and you can't see this. Let's drag it up to here. So I'm going to just get back to this other document. There we go. Now these are, I will say, these are big files. I have a very fast computer, but it still can struggle sometimes just doing things like opening large documents. So when you merge in or when you combine a lot of photos into one stack, it's pretty large. Most of these files are in order of multiple gigabytes. So what I'm doing is I'm just coming in here and making this kind of the size I want to see it. I think that's a little bit big. Let's go to my original version. I'm gonna just say that's a little bit big. We're gonna cut it down slightly here, and this may not be exact. And the cool thing is you can easily or fairly easily go in and tweak this later. Once you have everything laid out, you can actually resize it as a group, and we'll go over that. So let's zoom back in here. So I think this is pretty good. Maybe we'll just make it slightly bigger. And then I'm just going to take these lines and drag them to match. So I'm coming into the edges of the moon's disk, not the edge of the image itself, because I want to have something that is, equally sized all the way through. And that's going to present a little bit of headaches when we get to the, extreme partial phases where it's 95% covered, because you can't see the full width of the disc, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So I'm just going to put these lines, and I like to color code my more complicated things just so I have kind of a visual, like, oh no, I gotta turn this off before I export this image or before I publish this image, just to make it a little bit easier. So we have one image in here so far. We're going to come back over here, and I'm going to copy over the diamond ring, and let's just do the diamond rings. So as you can see by this final image, I decided not to do any prominence photos or Bailey's beads photos. They didn't really pop enough. Some of my other composites, I had the prominences, for example, in a big circle, and then all the other phases inside it and things like that. For this one, it just was not very clear. I've seen some people do some images that worked well. You can certainly try that. But anyway, we're going to come back. We're going to duplicate these again to composite PSB. So now we've run into kind of our first issue, and this is where pretty much all the tutorials on YouTube will agree you need to work with the blend modes. So we're going to do that. So first, let's just get them over here and get them roughly resized to approximately the correct size. This is the C2, so coming into totality, and this is the C3. So again, I'm just being very coarse here, getting that approximately. I'm going to turn my guidelines back on. And again, we want these to kind of remain at the top. Oop. I will say just briefly here, I am certainly very far from a Photoshop expert. I have done the basics in Photoshop for a while, but really it's only been in the past maybe 6 months that I've toyed around with more advanced work in Photoshop, and I am kind of a learn as you go, either by trial and error or by looking up techniques and problems when I have them. And that's one of the reasons why I found myself frustrated and am, therefore recording this video, is that I was not able to find a solution to my problem. And in fact, nobody seemed to mention it. And I saw a lot of images that retained this problem. And we'll get more into that. I think that it doesn't have to be a problem. I think the images can work well with this, but I was not a fan. So let's come in here, and what we're going to do is we're going to change these blend modes to lighten. And most tutorials will say either lighten or screen. Doesn't really matter. There's a slight difference. As you can see, there's kind of a little bit of a halo with the screen. So in fact, I think, yeah, Corona was on screen. You can kind of see that it has that little bit of a halo. So I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to do screen over here, or lighten, sorry. So I'm not sure if you can see, but we've now allowed through all of the darker colors. So the only thing that's coming up on these layers where we have lighten is lighter tones, lighter colors than the background. Anything that's darker is going to show through. And what that means is that we've lost our black. Because black is not lighter, than the blue in the background. So if I switch back, you watch the disk of the moon that's covering the sun. We got lighten, we got screen, we got normal. So now all of a sudden, the sky is somehow showing through both the sun and the moon, I guess. I don't really know. So, again, this doesn't look bad, but it's not realistic. And obviously, this whole concept is not super realistic, but I want to go for as realistic as possible. So, this is the new technique that I have not heard anyone else using. I'm sure there are people that have, kept quiet about it and not put a tutorial on YouTube, but let's do it. So, what we're going to do is we're going to keep these as lighten, and we're going to, I'll make a folder of these later. So, I'm going to go to my ellipse tool, and I'm going to try to get it as lined up as possible. I have not yet figured out how to make the ellipse stay where you put it, but we're going to hold down shift for a perfect circle, and see how I started right there at the edge and then it comes all the way over here. So kind of obnoxious to Photoshop, but you get used to it. So we try to line up the size. Luckily I have these guides, and I'm going to say right about there, and then we're going to need to bump it over. Now obviously that is not the right color. That's fine, we can fix that later. But I'm going to try to line it up, and actually this is helpful to line up with the edges really perfectly. And then we're going to change this to black. And then we're going to put it behind what we just did. So in front, behind. And behind means that any light bleed, such as from the diamond ring, or just from slightly overexposure, anything like that, is going to show up in front of the ellipse we just made. So we're going to group this, and we're going to call it C2 diamond ring. All right, so that's that one done, and that looks, I think, significantly better and significantly more realistic to what we all saw. So we're going to do the same thing for the C3 diamond ring. Just go to ellipse, and actually, you know what? I just made these the same size. So now that I'm thinking, let's make sure that these are green. C2 diamond ring. There we go. We're just going to duplicate this layer. Command or Control J. Ellipse one copy, and then we're going to take it and we're going to put it below the C3 diamond ring. Drag it over. It can be difficult to line up perfectly when it's below. So sometimes it can be helpful to just move it on top temporarily. And then also, as we discovered a minute ago, it can be helpful even to make it a different color, especially a very different color. So you can temporarily just go up to fill, change it to yellow or anything, line it up, and then put it back. And again, we need it to be underneath the actual photo file. Group it. C3 diamond ring, and there we have it. So we're almost done. We're going to Control or Command J again, and we're going to put it under the corona, V to move, and let's move it on top again for a second. Make sure it's lined up as well as we can. That's looking close enough for a zoomed out photo. And then move it again below. Call this one Corona. And then I'm going to actually group these again into a folder just called totality. All right, so let's zoom out a little bit. So you can see that these look, I won't say realistic, I'll say, as close to what you would have seen on the day as they can, because the sky is not showing through. And I think that's really important. Turn the guidelines off and you can see. So I think that works really well. So let's bring in some partial phases. So I'm going to hide those, turn on these. And I'm just actually going to jump back to my original just to remind myself which partial phases I used, because I don't remember. 15, 35, 55. Let's actually work backwards from the sun. 95, 80, 65. So we're going to pull in 95, 80, and 65. 95, 80, 65. Now, if I was really lazy, let me take that back. I am really lazy. I'm trying to do the right thing with my first tutorial and really show you from scratch how I'm doing this. So I am not taking the layers that I have already completed from the completed document, which would be very easy, and just say, oh yeah, I'm going to do it again. I am doing it from scratch, doing it the right way, grudgingly. So here we have it. We can move these over. We can resize them. You noticed I selected them all before doing this, just because this is going to allow me to get them close. They're not all perfectly sized with these raw images, but this gets them close, maybe saves 10 or 15 seconds. And then we'll just pick one. Let's start with 95. Now we're going to deal with how to spread these out and kind of align them throughout the image in a different step. Right now, all we're worried about is getting them blended into the image correctly and aligned, or rather sized, correctly and kind of in a straight line. So once we get them in a straight line, sized correctly, then we're going to worry about everything else. All right, so let's come to this one. We got 95. Let's try lighten blend mode. Now, I urge you to be really careful with these blend modes of the partial phases. In theory, it should work pretty smooth, pretty seamlessly. However, it worked that way, and then I tried to record this tutorial kind of by turning off the layers in my image, and it didn't work. You could see the borders. And so one thing I like to do real quick is actually duplicate it and turn it to normal so I can see where those edges are, and then just turn that one on and off and try to see if I notice any lines. And what you'll see is kind of a very subtle, almost embossed look around where the edges would be of the black. However, this is totally fine right now, so we're going to go with it. And I'm very happy that that's the case. So let's do 80. So this is pretty well sized. We're going to bump it down just using the arrow keys. There we go. I will say that this is not the full edge-to-edge disc, right? This would continue down, you know, maybe to about here, if you can see my cursor. I'm not worried about that. I want it to be perceptual, and we'll talk more about that when we get to the spacing, but I want it to look normal and look good rather than be normal and be good, if that makes any sense. You know, what I care about is the final image and how that looks. And I like doing this for each one. Just copy it real quick, change it to normal, turn it on and off really quick. Just kind of, I call this blinking, just to make sure that there's no issues there. But it looks great. And whoops. So one thing that bugs me a little bit about either Photoshop or just my knowledge of Photoshop is that there doesn't really seem to be a way to not have any tool active, just to like look at what you've done and analyze it and compare and kind of do whatever you need to do. And a lot of times I need to do this when using the move tool. And the only way to do what I want is to hide the transform bars or transform tools, which anyway I just find really annoying. So often you'll find me, you know, hit the marquee just to hide those momentarily, and then sometimes I'll forget to hit the V. So again, I'm just going to actually remember to duplicate this now, change the original 65 to lighten, and just blink that a couple times. Let's hit marquee. So that looks pretty good. I don't see any evidence of the black square, which is great. If that does happen, you kind of have to work with luminosity masks, which I can show later just in case it does happen to you, because I don't know the reason it happened and I can't help you there. So let's make sure we color this green. I'm using the color codes again. I don't know if I've said this, but I want to easily be able to identify what layers need to be on in the final image. versus what are just kind of like temporary working layers to get things aligned or anything like that. What am I doing? So color, green, and eventually I will put these in a partial phases folder. So I'm just coming in here again. This looks a little bit more orange, darker. I know that they're all identical exposures with identical adjustments, and I think it's just the way kind of that you can see it happen to the edge here as well. I think it's just less of the sun's disk versus more of the kind of the edge. This would be bending away from us in space, and therefore, I guess physics-wise, looking darker. So I think that looks good. It again, with wanting to be kind of perceptual, I may tweak that later. That's easy enough to do. But for now, I think that looks good. So let's come back to my original image. That was 95, 80, 65. Let's do 55, 35, 15. 55, 35, 15. 55, 35, 15. So we're going to duplicate. Apologies, I don't know the keyboard shortcut for that. But we'll come back over here. And we're just going to kind of repeat the process. So I will move tool, bring them back, deselect, and then resize them a little bit. Just get them close, get them in the ballpark. Somewhere like that. Come in here and zoom in. And let's do one at a time. All right, that's pretty close. So I'm actually going to turn on our lighten mode now, just so I can more easily see those guidelines, which fell down to the bottom. I'll have to fix that. Then I just use the arrow keys to bump it a little bit. You can also use shift arrow keys for a slightly bigger bump. I generally don't use that. I couldn't really tell you why, but there we go. We're going to do the same thing here. One thing I will say is I believe you can set up shortcuts for a lot of the things in Photoshop, potentially even something like switching a blend mode to lighten. And if you're doing either stuff like this a lot, or like after an eclipse you're doing a lot of it, you know, you might be spending a couple hours doing the same thing for a couple different compositions, it might be worth setting that up. I'm not going to go into that right now. I'm pretty sure I saw in the menu that you can do it. But if you can, it might be a little bit easier to just be able to temporarily set that up, and then, you know, even if you turn it off later, it's saving you quite a bit of time. We're going to show that, lighten, and adjust. That's pretty close. Now, I'm not focused on absolute precision, or at least I try my best not to be that much of a perfectionist about it, because realistically, you know, that's a couple of pixels. I'm at 70, almost 70% here, so there's 100%. So that tiny little bump, people are not going to notice at all when zoomed out here. But for the extra 15 seconds it takes, sometimes I do that. So I've now got these. I'm going to color them green. I'm trusting that the process that worked for the others worked for these. If this was my final image, if I hadn't already created that, I probably would do the thing where I duplicate it and check against a normal blend mode, but I'm just going to trust that it is good. So we're going to take these, we're just going to move them down below, and then these are all the partial phases. However, I'm going to include, oops, wrong one. I'm going to include my 0 as well in the partial, just for ease of use. So partial is not the right word. Yellow. Yellow suns is probably a more apt description. But anyway, there we have it. We're going to pull that in. Oops, wrong one selected. Accidentally put that in the wrong folder. There we go. So color green. I will just say again, I am not a Photoshop expert. This is stuff that I have taught myself, like, if not today, at least this week. Many of these things are techniques that I'm just learning myself and spitting back out to hopefully help a couple other people. So I'm saying partial in as in it's coming into totality, and then there'd be another group for partial out, and then we'll just color that green. But yeah, I'm not at all a Photoshop expert. I learn kind of tasks and tools as I need them, which is not the best way to learn, to be honest with you. And I've tried. I've signed up for the courses other photographers have done, and that's just not my style. As much as I wish it were. I like just, this is how you do this thing. Great, I'm done. Now I'm going to go do this thing and finish up and get back to the parts that I enjoy perhaps a little bit better, which is, the shooting and the more basic editing, things of that nature. And I'm not a professional photographer. I'm not a full-time pro. This is something I do really just as a hobby. And I'm a full-time running coach, skiing coach, things like that. So this is just for fun. So now I've got partial, I've got totality, and I want to bring my partial out. So partial heading out from totality, and you can see that on the final image, I don't have room for that much. You might have way more room. You might be able to put, every 10% or every 5% partial phases for all the way in and out. Or you might be more interested in just a few partial phases and having more totality images. That's it, like any of that is totally fine. While I'm here, I'm just going to turn this to lighten before I forget. So anything you want to do is totally fine. These are just kind of some techniques to potentially help you, get those things. So I have on partial out, 95, 80, 65. So those first three. So we're going to do 95, 80, oops. I always double click the blend. 95, 80, 65. Duplicate. Composite. Come back over here. Move tool. I'm going to move it over here now. Get it pretty close. Close enough. And we're just going to come in again. I'm starting from kind of sun side and working up, or working out rather. And again, this is not accurate size. Realistically, it should be probably that big. And you could certainly switch the blend mode and line it up with a full disk image, right? So that, even that's pretty close. So that is probably the correct size, right? That's right in line with the Eclipse image. And if I were being super scientific about it, this is what I would put in. And it's subtle, but I don't like it. So we're just going to make it a little bit bigger just so it kind of has the same perception of size. Maybe a touch smaller. Right about there. Come down, we'll do 80. And again, even this one, I think wouldn't quite be extending to the very diameter of the sun. It's pretty close. But at the angle, it's kind of hard, and I'm not worried about that. I'm going for that apparent size, very perceptual, and leaving it like that. I like that. I think that works. Change that blend mode to lighten again. So I was saying I'm not a Photoshop expert, so I apologize if I've left out an easier way to do some of these things, such as keyboard shortcuts or anything like that. I don't know what I don't know, and if I haven't used it before, I have no clue what it is or what it does or where it is. So this is kind of a rough sketch. I can turn the guides off. This is the basics, right? I've got all the pieces in here. I'm going to show you really quick what to do if you do notice that issue where you're kind of seeing an outline. Let's come back to normal. Actually, let's do it with the other one instead. So I'm going to show this on the 80, just because it's a little easier to see. So I come to normal, and I'm finding that I'm just seeing the outline of the black part of the image. Now you got a couple choices. One, you can come in here and try brushing and erasing all the black. You could maybe make it work, but it's going to look rough, or it's going to take you all day, neither of which are good. So you can come in here and do a selection, right? Color range selection, and just choose black and keep it pretty fuzzy, because that should be all black. And choose OK. And then you can either delete it or you can do an inverted mask. So I can just hold Option, click the mask, and that's pretty clean. It's pretty clean. And actually that worked way better than it did the first time I tried this. Yeah, so like I would honestly probably just leave that if that worked that well each time. But let's undo it. We'll deselect, and I'll show you one other way to do this. So same thing, we've got 80. I'm going to come up to a luminosity mask tool, which is very similar to what I just did with the manual color range selection and then selection and inverted mask. But this is a little bit more, I won't say automated, it gives you a little bit more control over what you're doing. And in this case, instead of selecting the black, I'm going to select what I want to come through by using, you can use TK9 Multimask or Lumenzia. Both are great. I'll admit to not having fully learned either of them, so that's why I kind of bounce back and forth of like, I kind of know how to do it in this one, so we're going to use that. So I'm going to do a range. It's going to say pick the darkest and lightest of the tones that I want to include, which is great. I'm going to actually click that. Notice it says either order is fine. So that's, I guess, not important, but don't be too picky about what you're doing. So then I'm just going to pick the darkest, which in this case is really just that really dark orange of the sun. And then it's just going to come up again, and then I'm going to try to pick the brightest yellow, which is going to be on this kind of center of the disk of the sun. And then I'm going to click OK. Now you can modify this if this isn't quite giving you what you want. For example, this is kind of coming up with you know, a little bit of fuzziness here. If there are sunspots visible, it's not going to work perfectly. So you can see over here, this would leave out a lot. If I come over to these other phases that show more sunspots, yeah, see, you're going to miss those sunspots. However, what's going to show through in this case is an extremely dark blue, and I would contend that you're not going to be able to notice the difference. And you know, if it does bother you, you can paint a little black behind that layer so that it shows through as black, but I really don't think it's going to be noticeable. So there's our layer in question right here. So that looks like a pretty clean defined edge, which is really all I care about. So then I'm going to come over here and hit mask, and that's going to mask so that just that comes through, and it takes a second. And so you can see a little bit of fuzziness coming through, but you come out here and there's no way you're going to notice that, really. And of course you can play around with the modifications and things like that, but that's just, hopefully you don't need it. You can see even there's a little bit of kind of an odd ring. So I don't think any of them is perfect. You may need to try all of them to figure out what works. Thankfully, for me right now, even with the exact same raw images, this didn't work before, but right now it's working pretty nicely. So let's talk about arranging them. So I'm going to bring my guides back in here. Oops, let's just make these green. And we're going to folder and partial out. And it doesn't really matter, we'll put it under totality. So I've got all my pieces. This is everything that I want to include in this image. And I'm going to turn my guides on to help me align things. And I'm just going to go to marquee just to have a little clearer view. So obviously I haven't touched anything down here, don't care. I'm just going to make this nice and large. So what I want to do is I want to come up with some guides. And if you haven't played with guides at all, they're pretty powerful for when you're compositing images together, or any sort of layout kind of thing. So I'm going to do new guide layout, and I'll bring this window up so that you can see it. So I've got a couple things here, and you can see that right now my spacing is pretty much similar to what I've got here, maybe slightly wider at times and slightly narrower at times. And that's 24 columns with, we're just going to delete this for now. Hold on. So if you have guides already, you want to get rid of them, clear guides, and then you go to new guide layout. So I got my new guide layout. Again, just get rid of that for now. So this is not quite what I want. I want them spaced a little bit further apart, given this size. So I'm just going to put fewer columns in. So let's try 22. And I accidentally hit enter, which is not great. So let's try that again. Like I said, not an expert, learning as I go. So new guide layout. So the preview updates automatically, right? So if I put 2, 29, 120, right? So let's try 20. So and you just take a second, look at where things are kind of spaced and where things will end up. You can even do some counting. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, so you can kind of line things up with how far they'll be. So I'm actually going to end up, I want, I think 21. Now, we're going to pretend that I did what I did when I was doing the original image, which is I had already lined up the corona image, kind of the center point, with where it was in the sky. Now, I didn't at this time, but we're just going to go with this because this is a good trick. So what I want to do is I want to adjust so that one of these lines bisects that image, that corona image. So I want to bump one of these, and I can do that just by creating a little bit of a margin from either the left or the right. So it's going to auto-fill with 20 pixels, which is really annoying, but you just delete them, and then you've got freedom. So the right is a little bit closer, so I'm just going to go with that, and we're just going to put in 100, so not quite enough, 400, 300, okay, so it looks like 250 maybe. That is pretty much right on. And again, I'm just looking at this central image, right? The one that the alignment matters to me, or rather the placement in the image matters to me. So I'm just looking at that one. And then I can take a look and be like, all right, this one's going to be here, this one could be here, this here, this here, this here, this here, this here, this here. And I can do some thinking. I'm like, all right, that's pretty good, but I want them a little wider. So I can come back and go to 20. Okay, well now my alignment's off, so I got to redo that, but that's fine. That's quick and easy. So now it might be more like a, 80, 90, yeah, let's say 95, right? So that is pretty good. And then I can just kind of reevaluate. So this one will be here, this will be here, this will be here. I like that. I like that margin. I think that margin's pretty good. If this one lines up. So this will be here, this will be here, this will be here, this one will be here, this will be here, this will be here, this will be here, this will be here. So that leaves me a little bit more room to move that whole sequence to the left a little bit, or up and left a little bit, which again, if I've already aligned my corona, I don't want to do that. But in this case, I'm okay with a little bit of playing. So you can use these margins and the number of columns to really get yourself a good alignment. And then all you need to do is just go one by one. And again, I'm going to start with the totality images and work outwards. So I'm just going to choose, okay, corona's lined up, C3 diamond ring, hit the V tool, and just line that up so it's bisected, just like that. C2 diamond ring, it's pretty close, but we want it right about there. And then just make sure it fits between your yellow guidelines too, these ones that are following. So that's pretty good. Let's go to the partial ins. So this is really important. So what you could do is you could align these along the guide columns as if they were the full disk of the sun, which if you're not following the time and the actual place by using like a time lapse video or time lapse sequence or anything like that, that's probably the most accurate way to do it, assuming that you've chosen equally spaced, which I have not, right? 0, 15, 35, 55, like that's not even. But if yours were evenly spaced, then you want to, potentially, you might want to keep them as if they were the full disk image. I don't care about that. I'm all about just the perception. So I'm going to split so that it's approximately bisecting what's visible. And that's going to be slightly different for each of these. And again, fight your urge to be a perfectionist on this, because, a few pixels or even, honestly, 10% of this, either way, is probably not going to be noticeable. Let's just turn these off for a second. Right, so there's that one. You can see that turning them on one by one is a little bit faster and easier when they're overlapping like that. So again, I'm just trying to split between where the bite starts and this other size. It doesn't have to be perfect. There's that one. And here's the full disk of the sun. And that one's obviously pretty easy. Bump it up with my arrow keys. Yeah, I like it. I think that's good. So we're going to do partial out. And again, I've only got 3 here. Just going to align that again, just halfway through what is visible. Actually 80 was pretty close. And 60. I like that. I think that's good. Command semicolon or control semicolon hides those guides, and then these ones you can just hide manually. And then you zoom out a little bit and get rid of your transform tools, and that gives you kind of the full image. Now, let's say the alignment just isn't quite working. So, for me, the central corona needs to be bumped a little bit to the right. I just select those 3 groups. It's going to show you these ellipses, the discs. Don't worry about that. V to move it, and you can move this whole group where you want it, right? You can literally put this anywhere. And the nice thing about this is that because it's pretty clean, we used the right techniques here, and we made those discs for the sun, you can literally put them anywhere you want. And they won't look, they'll look artificial if you get the moon on the land or the sun on the land, but they'll look like you did a clean job. Let's say that. So we've got a pretty good alignment here. I think I did a better job with this one for whatever reason, a little bit steeper angle. I could easily change that, except it's also going to change the rotation of the individual pieces. You may be okay with that. I went with the actual angle that they were on the day. Does it matter? We're not being scientific here. I don't know. That's really up to you. But if you do, want to tweak that, you can certainly do that, or you can literally go back in and just tweak the rotation of each one, or the placement of each one, and redo it. So once you have them all in and the right size, they're not super hard to move around. It's really quick and easy. You just get your guides. You can easily change the angle of those guides. I would do both at once. So now I'm just, there we go. So now I'm just going to make a steeper line. And then all I need to do is drag these down along my guides, which again, Command or Control semicolon. I just need to put these down along those lines, and I'm good to go. That's really it. So let's say I want them along these lines, right? So, kind of off to the right side here, I might want to hide that last partial phase, but it's a good look. Or I can come over here and do that, and just kind of slide them down until they're in the right spot. So I hope that helps, even one person. Again, this is something that I've been struggling with for, 3 days. I'll say it, 3 days. It's been 3 days of struggle. A lot of searching YouTube and, looking at other photographers' images and like, does theirs look like how I want mine to look? No, it doesn't. I gotta find someone else. But this is how I got the black disk of the sun. And to me, this looks better. It looks more correct. I totally would support anyone that said this was a more pleasing image. That's totally fine. But I like having it be black discs, because that's what it was. That's what was there. So that's what I settled on. This, I'm probably I always like to come back to it the next day and just kind of do some checks. Do I still like the alignment? Do I still like the margins between the top and right sun? Are there any other issues kind of with the image? Any kind of thing here. I always save my original files. Always. Always. Anything that I make, if I spend this kind of time on it, I always save the original for two reasons. One, if I want to go back in and tweak it, then I can do that. And I'll go in and delete all this other extra stuff I didn't use. But the other reason is that the next time I have the need to create a composite like this is probably going to be the next solar eclipse or maybe a lunar eclipse, which is not going to be for a while. And I can guarantee you I'm going to forget how. So being able to come in here and being like, oh, that's the technique I used. Okay, that's going to help. I've used that several times, even just in my Photoshop journey over the last year or so. It's always good to be able to go back in and remind yourself, like, oh yeah, here's how I created this. Here's how I made that look the way I did. And maybe even, yeah, I'm not really vibing with this anymore. I want to tweak it. I want to, do things a little bit differently. And you can do that. So don't just export it. Don't just, delete it. I know it's tempting with the size of these files, PSB files or, I'm pretty sure one of these is 4 gigs at least. Don't do it. In fact, because most of, I didn't talk about this, but because most of your pieces should be smart objects, I would even delete your original raw files because now they're embedded here in smart objects. So that's a bigger discussion than this, and someone who's more of a Photoshop expert should probably be telling you about that. But this is my final image. I've got a couple others up on my website, joshfieldsphotography.com. Please feel free to go and take a look. I'm also working on a blog post with some writing. There's a little bit of a kind of poetry type thing I wrote about the totality experience on the main page, which is linked right from the homepage. But I'm also working on a more in-depth blog post about kind of the planning and the gear, and probably linking to at least a little bit of the editing that went into this, including this video. If you like this and you find this interesting, please drop a subscribe, give this video a like. This is really my first time putting any sort of effort or time into YouTube at all, and I will tell you right at the end, this video is going to be 100% uncut, unedited. I'm just going to sync the audio from this microphone and hit publish. So again, hope this really helps out somebody. This is something I wish I had about 5 hours of work ago. Cheers, everybody.